Good afternoon, everyone. So we are here today in our additional class. I informed you about this on Saturday itself. So we'll be continuing from where we left off last Saturday. Last Saturday, we started looking at fundamentals of financial markets. Week before, we were looking at classification of financial markets. So these were the bases and the subsequent types of markets that we classified accordingly. So in this chapter, where we are looking at fundamentals of financial market, I explained you we'll be mainly looking at interest rate and informational efficiency, both targeting one specific type of a market. So when we talk about interest rate, the dominance of interest rate is very high in a debt market. So there we saw first we saw what an interest rate is. What does it mean or what does it reflect? It is the price for the borrowed funds. Then we saw why interest rate was significant to financial markets, starting from its importance in the monetary policy, and then we saw how it balances the demand and supply, let it be for money or for loanable funds. Then how it directs funds towards productive investments, how interest rates influences mine, yours, and the companies that we work for, their financial decisions, whether we need to go for a debt funding, equity funding or not, how we need to balance the financing decision, and at what point to, the timing of the financing decision as well. And then finally, we saw how interest rate influences the price of securities which are traded in money and capital market. More precisely, we're looking at debt securities. How does interest rate influence the price of the debt security? Then we saw that interest rate could be broadly defined as nominal interest rate. This is the rate that financial institutions quote when they give you the interest income. Real interest rate is when the expected inflation is adjusted for in the nominal interest rate. What is left is the real interest rate. So there is an equation developed by the economist Irving Fisher. And this was that equation, how these three variables are interconnected. And then using that, we did a question as well. Following the question, we also came up with a shorter method. Now, this gives you an approximation. It doesn't give you the correct answer, but in a situation where you need to cross-check, when you need to roughly know what the real interest rate is, or whether the real interest rate is a negative, where the inflation has surpassed the nominal interest rate, this approximation is like a guiding path. Second, after that, we looked at the methods of calculating interest. There we saw we had two ways to calculate. Simple interest rate, as the name suggests, it's one of the most simple methods of calculating interest. The amount that you invested into the interest rate multiplied by the time period that you invest. This is going to be for the entire time period. Your principal is going to be the same amount. And for that, the interest rate or the interest income would be also more or less the same if the rate is same. But compound interest rate was something different. Compound interest rate, though the first interest period calculates interest according to the simple method, subsequently, it follows the compounding technique. What is this compounding technique? Now, in simple interest, you only received interest income on your principal. The principal that you invested, only on that amount you received your interest. But under compound interest, not only on your principal, but prior accrued or prior received interest is also entitled for the subsequent month's interest. Okay, now this we went thoroughly in detail with the calculations and the formulas. last week. You can watch that as well. So in compound interest, essentially, you get a higher interest income. Okay. Then we moved on to how interest rate is determined. We know price in any market is determined by the supply of that particular good and demand for that particular good. It is both those sources which interact, and then finally the price of that product is determined. Similarly, interest rate is also determined in the same manner. Both these forces come in handy, demand and supply. But the question was demand of what and supply of what? Okay, so in explaining that, we had two theories. One was loanable funds theory, other was liquidity preference theory. So in loanable funds, the highlight was that, look here, equilibrium interest rate is determined by the supply and demand of loanable funds available. What do you mean by loanable funds? It is the sum supplied so that you can lend it out, and it is the amount that is demanded so that they can invest. Essentially, you're talking about the credit availability in an economy. Okay, but liquidity preference theory, according to that, it said interest rate, equilibrium interest rate is determined by supply and demand for money. Okay, so when we talk about money, here we talk about money balances. The keyword becomes money balances. What do you mean by money balances? Currency or cash readily available. Okay, so depending on your preference to hold money balances, interest rate is determined. Okay, so there we saw how the demand curves in both these theories are. It's very much similar, but when it comes to the supply curve, that there was a difference. Supply curve in the loanable funds theory was upward sloping, but in liquidity preference theory, it's more or less perfectly inelastic. It's just a standstill line. What is the reason behind that? We saw that money supply in any economy is controlled by, of course, the monetary authority, central bank. Okay, so they don't supply money according to how the interest rate moves. No, it's not relational or proportional to the interest rate. So just because the interest rate is increasing, they won't issue more money. Correct? It's not relational. So it stands still. Irrespective of the interest rate, money supply remains static. It depends on the stance of the central bank whether to change it or not. And when they change, ultimately it will cause an impact on interest rate, not the other way about. Okay? So this remains as a standstill line. So there you need to know how the interaction between demand and supply changes between these two theories. Okay? And then we left off at this particular point. And we left off at this particular point. We were looking at, okay, now we know what interest rate is, how it is calculated, everything. But we see that interest rate for some securities, for most securities, are different, very much different. Why is that? To find that reason, we saw that some securities which had the same term to maturity or same maturity, they had different interest rates. Why is that? That was one question. Other one was, okay, it's the same issuer. Okay, same person is issuing two bonds, but both the bonds are carrying two different interest rates. Why is that? Okay, so in explaining that, there were two concepts that we were introduced to. Risk structure of interest rates and term structure of interest rate. So first we will go through what risk structure is, and then we will move on to what term structure is. Okay. So risk structure of interest rate. Now you need to know what does this concept give you the answer for. Okay. Now risk structure of interest rate tells you why when two securities have the same maturity but still have two different interest rates. Okay. To answer that question, the concept would be risk structure of interest rate. Now, according to this concept, the answer given is, look here, even though maturity is the same, for these two securities, risk levels can be different, liquidity levels can be different, and informational cost behind these two instruments can be different. Okay. In certain books, they even consider the tax impact as well. Okay. As a fourth reason for the difference. Okay. For now, for us, let's keep let's keep tax consideration aside. Okay. Main three reasons for such a difference is risk levels being changed, liquidity levels, and the informational cost. Okay. Now you will be wondering, how are these being reflected in interest rates? Okay. Now interest rate, I told you, is the price for the funds borrowed. Okay. It is now if I am giving you money, it is my return. If I'm lending you money, it's my return and it's a cost to you. Okay. So when I am determining my interest rate, okay, when I'm determining my return, okay, I will have a minimum expected return. Correct? Okay. Bare minimum, I need this. But if something goes wrong, depending on the person who is asking, I'm going to up my return. Okay. Now let's say there are two people coming and asking me for money. One person is a wealthiest person, has all, but there's some timing issue, urgently need money. I'm comfortable. Okay. I know that this person won't default. Is a very genuine person, very good friend of mine, everything. Okay. So understanding that person's background, I know my risk is very, very low. I don't know, okay, that person will never default. So no point. So there's no risk for me. So I would give, okay, no need. Sometimes I would say no interest also. You give it to me in 1 month's time. Or I would charge only about 2%, very minimum, because I know that money will definitely come to me at that agreed date. But there is another person, other person doesn't have proper income level, struggling to meet their financial needs, and now needs a hefty amount. Okay. Now both of them are asking for 1 month period. That's the premise, right? Same maturity. Now, given this person's background, now I'm very scared. I know if I give it to this person, 1 month can be, at the end of 1 month, this man would go missing, or my money, with him, my money will also go missing, or he will ask for more time. Knowing the risk level, I would either say, first say, if it's very high, I would definitely say no. But again, depending on the risk appetite, you could say, okay, I would charge you 20%, 15%. Okay, because the risk is very high. For that risk, I'm not sure whether my money is going to come or not. So this is my interest rate. Okay, just like that. Now you have technical words for these now. Interest rate theoretically is built up with two components. One is the risk-free interest rate, and on top of that, what you find is the risk premium rate. Let's see it more diagrammatically. Okay. This here okay, It is the risk-free return. Risk-free return meaning now there is no any risk involved, only the time cost. Time cost meaning, okay, there is no additional risk, but you're giving the money for 1 month. So you're losing out on time value of money. Just for that, to compensate for that, you charge some interest rate. But there is no any risk that you consider as material. Okay, that you call as the risk-free interest rate or the risk-free return, risk-free rate. Okay, what does it compensate for? It compensates for your time cost. Because you're giving out your money is going to be tied up somewhere else for some time. To compensate for that time, you're getting a return. But there is no any risk involved. So you're not taking any additional return on that. Okay. Now this is the bare minimum. Even when there is no any other risks, bare minimum is the time cost involved. Okay. So this is the return that you expect for that time cost. So that is like the minimum level. So on top of this, according to how the risk is increasing, the risk premium will start to build up. Can you see here? Risk premium. So at this level, this is your risk-free rate. Okay. Now this instrument you are expecting, okay, it's a risk-free instrument. But if you get this instrument, okay, here there is a high risk than this instrument. Why? Because you're charging a risk premium as well. This is your time cost return, but on top of that, you have some concerns on their credit risk, on their liquidity risk, on their informational cost. On those aspects, you're a bit worried. Okay, or maybe they might be asking for a longer time. So you're considering that time maturity difference as well. Okay, so all these being built up is how this premium is decided. So when the premium is added to the risk-free rate, you get the total interest rate or the final interest rate that you quote to a person or you tell a person. Okay. Now, this is the definition for risk premium. Let's see. It is the incremental interest rate that is demanded by a lender or an investor because they're taking an incremental risk for that security. Okay. See here, when the risk is increasing, to compensate for that, they need a return. Now, what kind of a security that you can expect? What kind of a financial instrument can you expect? No risk. You're sure that your money will come back, no default, quick. Even if you need the money in between the maturity period, you can quickly sell off and get your money back. No need to do any other costs involved. What kind of a financial security could have such feature? Theoretically, we say the government issued securities. Okay, government issued securities to be risk free. Why? Because they are the sovereign authority. They have the authority to print money. In case of a default, even they could even print money and pay you back. Okay, so credit risk is going to be very, very low. Liquidity levels also is very high. Why? Because this is a government issued security. Not only you, everybody knows default risk is low. So anybody is willing to come and invest. Okay. So considering those aspects, the additional risks for you to bear is nearly zero. So what can you expect the government to pay you? Return for that time taken, that time value of money which you lose out by investing in that government security is the return that you will get. So ideally, government security, the interest rates that they quote are considered as risk-free interest rates. Okay, the interest rates that you get for government issued securities, you consider them as risk-free interest rates. All right. Now be careful. When I say government issued securities, it has to be issued in local denomination. Okay, when we move to money market, also we will talk about this. If the government is issuing an instrument in foreign currency, which is not there, which is not under their sovereign authority, then it involves a credit risk. Why do they have the ability to print dollars? No, you wish, okay? But we only have authority to print rupees. So whenever they issue a rupees related security, you consider it to be a risk-free instrument. Okay, so have that in the back of your mind. If this is a local, if it carries a local denomination, yes, okay. Following are some main risk factors that you consider when you're determining the risk premium for a non-government security. Okay, so you will consider the default risk. You will consider the liquidity risk involved. And you will also see the maturity risk. How long is this person going to take to pay you back? Okay, but because now we are talking under risk structure of interest rates, where maturity is the same. For the instruments that we are talking, maturity is the same. Okay, so we can forget or remove maturity risk out. So temporarily, because we are discussing under this concept, we are ignoring the maturity risk. Now let's see the 3 reasons that risk structure is giving us and compare whether, whether these factors actually warrant a difference. Okay, what is default risk? Default risk is the probability that the borrower is not going to pay your money in full. Let it be capital, interest, or even both. Okay, not being able to pay interest is also a credit default. Okay, so remember the keyword. Let it be principal, interest, or even both. So higher the default risk, if you know, if the borrower that you're giving to, you know, is a, not a good person, there's a high chance of your money not coming back, then you are going to charge the highest premium possible. Why? Because your risk levels is very high. So when your risk premium is high, obviously the interest rate quoted is going to be higher. See this diagram? Now let's take this scenario. Over here, risk premium is very high. But in this scenario, risk premium is relatively lower compared to this. Comparing to the position in R, the position in A is the risk premium level is low. Therefore, the interest rate is low for A than R. The only differentiating point was risk premium. Why? Risk-free rate remains the same. It is because the risk premium is changing, the interest rate is changing. Okay. Second reason, liquidity. What do you mean by liquidity? How quickly you can turn a financial asset into ready cash. Okay. So for you to quickly turn it into cash, someone else or a market should be willing to buy it from you. Okay, then you consider it to be a high liquid asset. You can quickly sell it off with no additional financial cost. Okay, so if you have an instrument which is high liquid, you can quickly, if you need money and you need to encash it, you can quickly sell this asset and get your money back. But you have another financial asset which is illiquid. Not many people want this asset. So it's hard for you to realize your money quickly. In case you have urgent financial need, you can't quickly convert it into cash. Okay. So what has a higher risk? Obviously, the financial asset which you can't sell off quickly is going to be risky for you, because you might not get the desired market value because not many people are willing to buy it. So the instrument with the highest liquidity has the lower liquidity risk. So you're going to charge a lower premium for the high liquid asset and a higher premium for the high risk asset. Okay. According to how the risk level is changing, your pricing is going to be. Finally, information cost. What do you mean by information cost? I am the lender. Okay, I'm going to give two people money, the initial example. Okay, now I told you very first one was my good friend. I know that person, let's say my next door neighbor. I know all details about the person. But the other one is someone I have not even seen but has heard that I have money and now is coming and asking me for a loan. Now, my additional time and cost to verify the borrowers is very less for the person who I know very well. Okay, because I know them very well, I don't have to do any additional background checks. But to the unknown person, I need to do every possible background check. The past credit worthiness, the character of the person, the source, everything. So that's going to take time. That's going to take a cost from my end to do that research, everything. Take that scenario to a higher level. Even for an investor, even for a bank, when they give out a loan, if that particular borrower is a well-established company who is widely known in the market, it becomes easier because information is available. You can quickly know and you can quickly understand how the company is. You can quickly get a knowledge on the borrower. But if you have another borrower who you have to take an additional effort to go and do a research, that is going to involve time and cost. So to compensate that, also you're going to increase your expected return. Now think about this scenario. If it's a bank, government is coming and asking for a loan, and there is another SME who's coming and asking for a loan. Okay. What about the informational cost and time involved? Obviously, because it's a government, they will have good collateral. You know the background and it's a rupee borrowing. You're confident on giving that loan. But if you have an SME who's coming out, where you don't have any other prior banking relationship, it's obvious that you're going to take time, analyze the person, inspect the business, everything. Okay. Do you understand how it impacts the rate of return? Okay. This is why we saw we compared treasury bond and a debenture last week, remember? So you can see treasury bond carries a 7.31% interest rate. But same maturity, okay, 5 years, same maturity. But let's say here, a debenture issued by this company, same maturity, but is carrying a higher interest rate. Now you can compare what is the risk-free rate, what is the additional risk premium given, and the reasons behind that risk premium. The level of the default risk, what kind of a premium they would have given, that's understandable from that gap. Okay, now this risk premium changes from the borrower to borrower. So from here you can see for this particular entity, 5-year debenture at 9.25. Here there is another 5-year debenture at 9%. Here another 5-year debenture at 10.25. Okay, so if you compare all this with this particular tenor is same, but you can see how the interest rate is fluctuating. Now this is a government issued security treasury bond. We know it's a rupee denominated instrument. Obviously we consider government issued securities to be default risk free. Okay, default risk free. But the other debenture issued is from a corporate, a listed entity. Okay, listed, even though the company is the best company, there be some kind of, some level of a credit risk involved. Okay, some aspect, even though it's low, but still there is some amount in comparison to the government issued security. Then we move to liquidity. Because it's a government issued security, the market is highly liquid. Anybody, eyes closed, is willing to come and buy this instrument from you. But if it's a debenture issued by a corporate, if you are going to subsequently sell it off in the share market, the new investor, it depends on the appetite for that instrument, and it's going to differ. For some instruments, the liquidity level could be relatively better, but for others, very low. So according to that, the premium is going to change. Finally, information cost. Government issued security, you know how long, from how frequently the government is issuing this, how they're being paid back. You have all information readily available, and with the additional guarantee of default risk being low or absolutely nil, you're not going to spend much on informational cost or time either. But if it's a debenture issued by a corporate, now you're going to see why is this person issuing. Okay, why is this person issuing this debenture? What is their financial? You're going to go for forums and understand about the borrower, everything. Now that's going to have a cost and a time involved. And you as an investor is going to expect some kind of a return for that as well. Okay, I hope this area was clear to all. Now we move to term structure of interest rate. Now in the initial one, maturity was the same, but all other aspects were different. It was only maturity that remained the same. Now when you're coming here, term structure of interest rates, you're going to know the answer for why securities issued by the same company, issued by the same issuer, still has different interest rates. Okay. Last week we saw this with the government security example. Treasury bond issued by the government, but a 4-year treasury bond had this rate, a 7-year treasury bond had this particular rate. We are going to learn why. And see here, this is a company issued debenture. The same company issuing a 5-year debenture carries 10.25, but they're issuing a 10-year debenture which is going at 12%. Why? Okay, to answer that, you have term structure of interest rates. Remember, what is constant here? Same risk and liquidity characteristics. Okay, ideally, it's coming from the same issuer. Okay. So in term structure, or according to term structure of interest rates, it tells you, look here, even though the risk and the liquidity characteristics are the same, still this instrument carries different interest rates because their maturity is different. Okay, because the maturity is different, interest rate is different. Now, when I'm talking about maturity date or term to maturity, what are we talking about? The time taken until your initial invested amount or the principal amount is returned to you. Okay, the time left until your initial investment comes back to you. That is the maturity that we are talking about. Okay, now in the risk structure of interest rate, it was very difficult for us to graphically see the relationship. We were talking about why interest rate was different when maturity is constant, and the reason was because risk and liquidity and informational costs were different. It was very hard to plot on a graph. But now term structure says, look here, interest rate is different because maturity dates are different. Okay, so interest and now maturity are quantifiable aspects. Therefore, it's something that you can plot on a graph. So you can see this graphically. So moment you plot this relationship on a graph, what do you call that? You call that the yield curve. Yield curve is highlighting you the relationship between the interest rate and the maturity for a particular instrument. Okay, keyword for a particular instrument. I can't talk different instruments at the same time. If I'm talking about a treasury bond, it has to be the yield curve of a treasury bond. Interest rates and the different maturities of a treasury bond. Okay, if I'm talking about debentures, it has to be interest rate and the differing maturities of debentures. Okay, I hope I'm clear. So once you plot, ideally a yield curve would look like this. Interest rate on your y-axis and maturity on your x-axis. This shows the relationship between the interest rate and the maturity for a particular financial instrument. Okay. You simply plot according to the tenor. For a 3 months instrument, this is the interest rate. For a 2-year instrument, this is. So even when you, if you can go to the CBSL website and plot the yield curve according to the latest available information, still there'll be a curve that is, you can get the current yield curve for government securities. Okay. Now this yield curve can take 4 shapes. Okay, it can come in 4 shapes. One is the upward sloping yield curve, downward sloping yield curve, flat yield curve, Finally, humped or bell-shaped curve. Okay, so we are going to see what are the shapes and why, what is it indicating to us. Okay, first we have a upward sloping yield curve. Now this is one of the most common yield curves you see in markets. Why? Because essentially, with the time increasing, the interest rate, the risk level is going to change, and therefore longer the maturity, interest rate is going to be higher. Okay, therefore commonly in markets you see upward sloping or positively sloped yield curve. So when interest rate increase, when maturity is increasing, interest rate will also be increasing. Okay, now what is this positively sloping yield curve or a upward sloping yield curve indicate to you? On what situation can you see such a upward sloping curve? When the particular market has a high level of economic activity. When the economic activity in that particular market is very high, you expect to see a upward sloping curve. Why? Because when economic activity is high, obviously production levels are higher, investment levels are higher. In that such a scenario, inflation is going to be high. Okay, along with inflation, because investment is higher, interest rates are also going to be high. Okay, finally, with economic activity being increased, that's going to lead to economic growth. So you expect to see a upward sloping yield curve when you expect economic activity, interest rate and inflation to pick up in the future. Okay, now let's go to this diagram, detailed one. Now under the normal yield curve, because now this, why do you call this the normal yield curve? Usually in markets, this is what you see. Okay, it can be steep or normal. This is the normal shape. Now when it is steep, remember the steepness is going to tell you how different or the interest rate spread between the short and the long-term instrument. Now remember, here you have terms to maturity. Okay, it can be 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Okay, now in the normal curve, this is the 1 year interest rate. Okay, this would be the 3-year interest rate. If you see the spread, this spread is going to be lesser than the difference between these two tenors in a steeper curve. In a steeper curve, this difference is going to be higher. Okay. Now, when this difference, the difference is the interest spread. With the maturity, the premium, the change in the interest is going to be higher. Okay. So, for a steeper curve, the interest spread between a short-term instrument and a long-term instrument is higher than a normal positively sloped yield curve. Okay, so remember that. Just put on, maybe write it down on the side of the diagram. Next, we have downward sloping or inverted yield curve. So in a downward sloping yield curve, what happens? When maturity is increasing, that means 1 year, 3 years, 5 years or so, interest rate keeps declining. So what happens here, you can see that longer the tenor, interest rate is decreasing. And another observation is long-term financial instruments are going to carry a very low interest rate than the shorter term instruments. Now see, 1 year instrument, let's say it's priced at 5%, but a 7 year instrument is now going to be priced somewhere around 2%. Okay. When can you see such a yield curve? Now we saw normal yield curve is when the activity levels are improving. But when the opposite of the curve, when the inverted yield curve is visible, it shows that, look here, economic activity in the future is expected to slow down. Okay. Economy is moving towards a recession. In such a scenario, yes, a yield curve could be visible, but when you plot your yield curve. Flat yield curve. Flat yield curve is very, very simple. What does it mean? For every maturity, interest rate is same. For 1 year instrument also interest rate is same. For a 10-year instrument also it's the same. When can you see such a scenario? Now this is very unlikely for you to see a straight curve down, but this appears when the market expects a future uncertainty, because when they don't know where it's heading, you don't know how it's going to change, there'll be a constant rate spread throughout the maturity levels. Okay, only in that case you will see a flat yield curve. Finally, you have the humped yield curve. What is this humped yield curve? You also call it the bell-shaped yield curve. Here, the very short term and the longer term is more like a flat yield curve. Okay, but in the middle, in the medium term, you expect a sharp rise in interest rates. Temporarily, you expect a sharp interest rates. Okay. In such a scenario, you see the humped yield curve or a bell-shaped yield curve. Remember, in the shorter term and in the very long term, you see a flat curve. It is in the medium term you expect a interest hike. Okay. Now you will be wondering, okay, all these are theoretical, something that you can't see in practical world. Let's see. Okay. Now these are yield curves plotted based on the US Treasury securities. Okay. Now I am going to, you have the date here. Let me see whether I can take this image. Okay. I hope it's visible for you. Okay. So here we have the dates as well. Let's start from 2000. Here can you see the curve is nearly inverted. Okay. Curve goes as a inverted yield curve. So what was happening in this particular time? In 2000, US was undergoing a dot-com bust. Most of the technological company shares had a hit. Enron collapsed, world.com collapsed. Okay, it was in such a scenario. In that period, the yield curve appeared in this way. They expected a future uncertainty or a future recessionary period. Okay, in 2000s. Now here, now see, I told you, you don't see a static yield curve. Okay, but in the midterm, can you see here? More or less, it hovers at 5%. See the period here, 2007. What was happening in US in around 2007? They were in the initial stages of the global financial crisis. Such a crisis doesn't happen overnight. You have several indications coming in. In such a time, it was a very uncertain period for the economy. They didn't know where it was heading. Lot of distress situations popping here and there. Okay, can you see a nearly flat yield curve being visible? Now we move on to the third diagram. 2010. You obviously see a positively sloped upward rising yield curve. What is happening in 2010? It was the recovery period from the global financial crisis. The worst happening in 2008. Post that, the recovery stage. Not even 2009, around 2010 is when the real recovery period started kicking off. Okay. So on such particular period, when the yield curve was plotted, it took the following shape, upward sloping yield curve. So you can see how the sentiment, actually the market sentiment being reflected onto the yield curve. Okay. Now we saw 4 types of yield curves. Okay. We saw why they took that shapes. Okay. General observances. But there were theories in finance where each theory justified why each yield curve took a particular shape. Okay. Now what you are going to learn is what are these theories that gave explanations about these different shapes, and from what basis are they giving these justifications. Okay. So we had 4 theories that were explaining the term structure of interest rates. They were essentially telling you, look here, because of this reason is why the yield curve was looking in this particular manner. Okay. So first we have the expectations theory, or it's called as also the PO expectations theory. Second, liquidity premium theory, market segmentation theory, and then finally preferred habitat theory. Now what we are going to look at is individually into these theories, and let's see what each theory is telling us, and from that justification, can you justify each shape that we saw. Okay. Very first one is expectations or PO expectations theory. Now, let's see what the heart of the theory is. Okay, we are going to see what's the core, the heart of the theory, understand what that heart of the theory is, and then we can build up later. Okay, now this theory believes that interest rate of the long-term financial instrument or a long-term security is equal to the average of the short-term interest rates that happen in that life of the long-term security. Okay, spoke in English, maybe you didn't understand. Let's go to a good diagram and get it. Okay, now here you have a yield curve. What is expectations theory telling you? Interest rate of a long-term instrument. Okay, so interest rate of, let's say, a 5-year instrument is equal to interest rate of a 5-year instrument is equal to the average of what? Average of the short-term interest rates that happen within the life of this long-term instrument. In other words, short-term interest rate of a 1-year bond, 2-year, 3-year, 4-year. When all these are averaged out, you get the 5-year interest rate. That is what the expectation theory believes. Okay, you will have a 1 year, let's say this is 2, 3 and 4. Okay, so interest rate of at this, interest rate of this, interest rate of this and this, and a 5-year. When all these are averaged out, you get the interest rate of a 5-year bond. Okay, that is what the expectation theory tells you. For example, if the investor expects short-term interest rates will be 10% on average for the coming 5 years, expectation theory says then a 5-year bond should have interest rate of 10%. Okay, so in case some of you all didn't get it, let me again explain. Okay, now let's say this is 1 year, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Okay, now this is a 5-year bond that we are talking about. A debenture, let's say a debenture with a 5-year maturity, complete 5 years that you are investing. Okay, so interest rate of this instrument is equal to the average of the short-term interest rate. Short-term meaning 1, 2, 3, 4 and even 5. Now these are 5 years. Now you take it as year basis. Okay, so 1 whole year is a short term. Okay, for that particular, including this 5th year. Okay, now 5-year debenture is a complete 5 year. Okay, now here you can see, the short-term interest rates which occur in the lifetime of that bond. For example, let's say interest rate in first year is 4%, 5%, 6%, 7% and 8%. Okay. Then what should be the, now what do you mean by 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? In 2021, 1 year interest rate was 4%. 2022, 1 year interest rate was 5%. 2003, 1 year interest rate was 6%. 2004, 1 year interest rate was 7%. 2005, 1 year interest rate was 8%. Okay, short-term interest rate for the 5 years that you're looking at. Then this theory says, if these are the numbers, according to the theory, a 5-year debenture which you book for that entire 5 years should be the average of these rates, which means 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8. 30 divided by 5. Then the 5-year debenture should ideally carry 6% as the interest rate. Okay, are you clear? It is the average of this short-term interest that is reflected for that long interest as the long-term instrument. This is what is believed as per expectations theory. Okay, if investors expect that the short-term interest rate will be 10% on average for the coming 5 years, then a instrument which has the maturity of 5 years should be having that average as its interest rate, which means 10%. Okay, I hope you all are clear. Now let's say, now this theory, so according to the theory we saw the interest rate of the debenture which has 5 years is 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 divided by 5 years, which was 6%. Okay. Now this is what is believed as per the theory. Okay. Now can you see, if the short-term interest rate, let's assume of the 3rd year, increases to let's say 11% temporarily, then this is also going to change. Short term of, let's say, the 1-year interest rate increases. Initial, the 1st year changes, then again the interest rate of the long-term bond is also changing. So as per this theory, there is a very close association between the short-term rates and the long-term rates. Very close relationship. If the short-term rates are moving, then as per expectations theory, long-term interest rates should also move on average. The average of that impact should be visible on the long-term instruments. Okay, that's why we say this theory implies a very strong relationship. This theory implies a very strong relationship between long and short-term interest rates. So let's see how this theory justifies the shapes of these curves. Okay, when the yield curve is upward sloping, the expectation theory says, look here, your curve is upward sloping. Your curve is upward sloping because the short-term interest rates, on average are on the rise. Okay, because the short-term interest rates on average are increasing, your long-term bonds are going to have a higher interest rate. Therefore, the yield curve is going to be upward sloping. Now, understand on what justification or what explanation are they giving behind that shape of the curve. Okay, they are saying, look here, yield curve is upward sloping because the long-term interest rates are increasing. Why? Because the short-term interest rates are expected to rise on average in the future. Because of this, the long-term rates are picking up. Okay. So what are they telling when the yield curve is inverted? It's the same. Now what are they saying? The yield curve is downward sloping because average of future short-term interest rates. Okay. Average of the future short-term interest rates are expected to be lower. Because of that, the long-term interest rates are declining. When the yield curve is flat, they say short-term interest rate on average are not expected to change. Therefore, the long-term interest rates of the long-term instruments also remain unchanged. When it's a humped yield curve, they expect the short-term interest rate to be on the rise on average, but only for the immediate future. Remember that. Only for the immediate future, you expect the short-term interest rate to be on the rise on average. Now, throughout this, there is a keyword that I need you to note. For each explanation given, they use the word expected. Okay. Okay. Why? You're talking about expectations theory. These are all based on, these are pure expectations. You expect the future short-term interest rates to pick up. Okay. Therefore, the long-term bond is going to be on the rise. Okay. And another word I want you to highlight is on average. Remember the premise of this theory. Premise of this theory is the interest rate of a long-term security is equal to average of short-term interest rate that is expected to occur over the life of the long-term security. Okay, so always it is an averaged out impact that you will see. Okay. Second, you have liquidity premium theory. Okay, now before we move on to that, I want to highlight another point in pure expectations theory. Now, I hope you all have all understood that. Okay, there's no any questions. Okay. Now, I'm going to confuse you all a bit. Okay, now I'm going to ask questions behind that theory. Let's see whether this theory is valid or not. Now, expectations theory, what did it tell you? It told you, okay, look here, if you have a bond, let's say it's a 2-year bond, okay? This 2-year bond, one year, let's say 2021, and now this is 2022. Okay, this is completely 2022. Let's say the 1-year interest rate in current year hovers around 5% currently. Next year, it's going to go down further, assume at 3%. Okay, so as per expectations theory, okay, as per expectations theory, it says, look here, interest rate on this 2-year long-term bond is going to be the average of this. So 8%, 5 plus 3, 8. divided by 2, it's going to carry 4% as the interest rate. Okay, this is what the expectations theory is telling you, correct? Okay, but imagine this, I'm one investor and you are another. Okay, so today both of us, let's say January 1st, both of us are investing same amount of principal. Okay, I'm investing in this 2-year bond. Straight away I get my principal in 2022. But you are investing annually. Now you put the money for 1 year, 5%. Next year you are reinvesting at 3%. Okay. Now according to the expectations theory, both of us on average are ending up with the same return. Okay. So expectations theory says these are like perfect substitute. Even if you put your money in a long-term bond, or even if you put your money in short-term and keep revolving it, both of it is going to end up in one. On average, the impact is same. Okay. So if you can just put a note on the side of expectation theory, because of its belief, because of this, okay, because of this, it indicates that all maturities are perfect substitutes. Okay, because it's the on average impact. Even if I invest in a 2-year bond directly and someone else invests in 1 year and then reinvest another year, the impact is same. On average, both of us end up at the same point. That is what is believed by the expectations theory. But now I'm going to create questions. What? Now I have already committed myself as an investor, have already committed my money for 2 years. You as an investor have only committed right now at 1 year. Okay. So at this scenario, at the end of 1 year, you have the opportunity to walk away. You don't essentially have to reinvest in another year. But for me, I'm going to block my money for 2 years stretch. At least at the end of 1 year, you're going to get your principal back and you're going to reinvest again. For me, no, at the end of 1 year, I don't see my principal. It's only after the second year. Okay. So who is at a disadvantage now? The one with the long-term instrument. Okay, I'm going to be at a disadvantage. Because, okay, at the beginning, we both said, okay, on average, same return. I'll put for long term, you put short term. But at the end of 1 year, if you move out with your money, you end up with 5% return. I put the money for 2 years, I'm only going to get 4%. Okay, that is one. Next scenario, let's assume in the second year, by some chance, interest rate has picked up. Okay. Now, in the practical world, this on average story doesn't happen. By chance, the second year interest rate moved up. Let's say at 6%. Again, who's going to benefit? The one who invested in the short term. Why? At the end of 1 year, they get the money back. Okay. They get the money back and they get to make the choice whether they are going to reinvest at a lower rate or whether they are going to reinvest at a higher rate. Okay, they can make that choice. But someone who directly parked the money for a longer period, someone like this person, what's going to happen? I already beginning of 2021 agreed for 4%. So whatever market interest rate increases, I don't get the benefit. So again, the long-term instrument, the investor who invested in the long-term instrument is losing out. Okay. Understanding this issue is how the liquidity premium theory came about. Okay. Now, liquidity premium says, okay, look, very good expectations theory. We agree with your premise. Okay, but you're missing out these two scenarios. In these two scenarios, if these two scenarios happen, on average, both the investors don't get the same thing. The long-term investor is going to lose out. Okay. So liquidity premium theory, it is an extension of the expectation theory, says, fine, we agree with what you said, long-term bond interest rate of a long-term bond is equal to the average of the short-term interest rate. Correct. But in addition to that, there should be a premium given. Okay. This premium, which is a liquidity premium or a term premium, is given why? To the person who is holding the longer term bond. Okay. That additional interest rate should be given to the person for that additional risk bond. All right. That is what the liquidity premium theory suggests. Okay. Investors tend to prefer shorter term bonds. Why? Because they have less interest rate risk. What do you mean by interest rate risk? Interest rate risk is after you invest in a certain instrument, you lock your money for that time, right? Within that time, if the market interest rate fluctuates, you're going to be at a loss. Okay, so let's say you park the money only for 3 months. Because the time given is less, volatility in interest rate can be expected to be low. But let's say you put your money for 2 years. In 2 years' time, can I expect the interest rate to have no volatility? It can have minor volatility, or it can even shoot up. It can even go back to 14, 15 levels. Okay, that probability is available. If that happens, and I already invest in a low interest rate bond, the long-term investor is going to lose out. Okay, whereas the short-term investors are going to get profited. So, to compensate for the longer-term bond, an additional liquidity premium or a term premium should be given. Okay. So, can you see this particular diagram? In order to show you how this works, how the extension works. Okay. For explanation purpose only, I have taken the flat yield curve as per expectation theory. Okay. In case of flat yield curve where you expect no change, still as per liquidity premium theory, the curve becomes a positively sloped curve. Why? Because on top of this, a premium is given. For each additional maturity that's taken up, a additional premium, interest premium is offered. Okay. Therefore, liquidity premium theory explains interest rates on bonds of different maturities move together. What do you mean by that? If interest rate of a 5-year instrument moves from this point to this point, can the 10-year interest rate not move? No, it has to increase as well. Why? The premium given is additional. That person is holding for another 5 years. Okay. Therefore, interest rates have to move together. Now, this is also seen in the expectations theory. Expectations theory also told you, because there's a stronger relationship between short-term and long-term interest rates on the bonds with different maturities move together. If the short-term interest rate moves, long-term will also move. Okay. And liquidity premium theory explains that yield curves are usually upward sloping. The most common ones you find is upward sloping. So that this theory gives you the explanation as to why you see this as the most common yield curve. Okay. Very rarely you see a flat curve. Mostly you see a upward sloping curve. So justifying the reason for this is what the liquidity premium is suggesting for you. The liquidity premium theory is suggesting. Okay. So can you see here EH? Now here we have plotted both the diagrams as per both the theories. So EH is as per expectations theory. LPH is as per liquidity premium theory. H means hypothesis that they have used in this particular textbook. So according to the theories, you can see the two diagrams. So as per expectations theory, upward sloping curve was more or less normal. But moment you add a term premium to that, you can see the curve becoming more steeper. Correct? The curve now becomes more steeper as per liquidity premium theory. You can see that in the inverted or the downward sloping curve as well. Initially, expectations as per expectations theory, it is downward sloping. Okay, but now it becomes a little bit further. It moves a little bit higher. Why? An additional premium is given. But in a situation of an inverted or a downward sloping curve, still the future interest rate is lower than the current interest rate. That gap is there. But the curve is now raised a bit. Now, if you have a flat curve as per expectation theory, obviously now that becomes after a liquidity premium is added, it becomes a upward sloping curve. Okay. Now remember, liquidity premium theory gives you the reason or explains you the reason why it's upward sloping. It is not specifically giving you a reason as to why it is continuously downward sloping. Okay. It only focuses on or gives you a reason as to why usually you see upward sloping yield curve. Okay. Now going through all this, aren't you wondering, is liquidity premium always positive? Won't it be negative? Should it be always an additional premium given? Can there be a deduction? Can it be negative? No. Why? It is an additional premium given to you for that longer time that you are taking. So longer the time, higher the premium going to be. Okay. So liquidity premium is always positive. Okay. And that moves with maturity. If you can put an asterisk or highlight over here, it is a positive and it always moves with maturity. It can't decline. You understand the reason why, right? Because long-term investors face a higher interest rate risk, they have to be compensated. That was the justification. So you can't you can't reduce the interest rate that the long-term investors get, right? You can't reduce it further. You have to give them something additional. So they'll be encouraged to go for longer term bonds. Okay. So liquidity premium is always positive, and that grows or increases with the maturity period. Longer the maturity, higher the liquidity premium offered. Therefore, always it becomes an addition on top of the expectations theory curve. And because of that, the curve becomes more steeper than what it was before. Okay. Third, market segmentation theory. Okay, now each theory is telling us like a different story. Now we saw expectation theory, we saw liquidity premium theory. Liquidity premium theory was very much linked to expectations. Okay, now let's see what the market segmentation theory is telling you. Now market segmentation theory says there is a yield curve. Okay, now this is a yield curve. Market segmentation theory says each of these are separate markets. This is a one. Now let's say this yield curve is for treasury bonds. Okay. Okay. This is a yield curve for treasury bonds. Okay. So as per market segmentation theory, the theory says, look here, this is a 2-year treasury bond market. This is a 3-year treasury bond market. This is a 5-year treasury bond market. Each of them are separate segments, separate markets. And you get this interest rate here, right? Now let's say here, the interest rate that you get for the 2-year instrument. Let's say it's 0.75 for a 5-year instrument, somewhere close to, let's say, 1.5. These rates are the equilibrium interest rate in that particular market. So let's say a 2-year bond carries an interest rate of 0.75%. Then market segmentation theory says, okay, 0.75% is the equilibrium interest rate in the 2-year treasury bond market. Okay. So if I say this is the equilibrium interest rate, then how is this interest rate decided? By the demand for 2-year treasury bond and supply for 2-year treasury bond. Okay. Similar to that, how is the 5-year interest rate decided? If the theory is calling that equilibrium interest rate, then demand for a 5-year treasury bond with the supply for 5-year treasury bond, the interest rate for that 5-year bond market is determined. That is what is said in the market segmentation theory. Now here the diagram is not very clear for you, but you should be able to see it in your note. The shorter term equilibrium rate or the rate noted is the result of the demand and supply forces for that particular tenor. Okay. Let's say this is 1. Let's say this is 5 years, the 5-year demand for a 5-year bond with the supply for the 5-year bond, this particular interest rate is decided. Now, if this is a 10-year bond, then demand for a 10-year bond with the supply for a 10-year bond, the interest rate is determined. Okay, that is the heart or the core behind the market segmentation theory. As the name suggests, the market segmentation theory suggests that the market for different maturity bonds are completely separate and segmented. Okay, here can you see? This market is separate to this particular market. Totally different and separated as per the market segmentation theory. Because of that, the interest rate that is determined is said to be the result of the interaction between the supply and demand for the securities at that particular maturity. So if we are talking about a 1-year security, demand for 1-year securities and supply for 1-year security decides the market or the average interest rate for that particular market. Okay. Now, this theory, because it says the markets are completely segmented and separate, what happens is it also assumes that there is no any slippages. Okay, no any slippages, no any impact. Just because the 1-year interest rate moves up, the 2-year interest rate won't move up as per the theory. Okay, the theory says because the markets are segmented, separate, people don't move from one market to another, you fix at one particular maturity level. So what happens in that particular market won't influence another market. Okay, that is another belief of the market segmentation theory. According to the theory, interest rate for different maturities are determined independently of one another. Now, this should be in your mind. Why? Because now this is a difference we saw with the other two theories. Now, other two theories says no, short-term and long-term instruments are highly connected, very strong relationship, and all the interest rates move together. Correct? See here, expectation theory, it implies that there's a strong relationship. Why? The average of the short term decides the long-term interest rate. Same thing with liquidity premium. It assumes that all the interest rate move together, but because the premium levels keep increasing throughout the tenor. Okay, but here it takes a different stance. It says no relationship between short and long. Each market works in its own isolation, and the interest rates are determined completely independent of one another. Okay, so the short-term interest rates depend on the supply and the demand for short-term funds. Long-term interest rate is determined by the demand and supply for long-term funds. So someone who wants long-term will never move to a short-term segment, is the belief behind this segmentation. Okay. Key assumption in the market segmentation theory is that the expected yield from holding bond of one maturity has no effect on the demand for a bond of another security. Okay, the interest rate, or let's say the interest rate you receive in the short-term maturity is very high. Just because the interest rate is very high in the short-term market, the long-term market won't have a low demand. Okay, I hope I'm clear to you. Just because the interest rate in the short-term market is higher, Let's say it's at 10%. Just because it's at 10%, people won't be less demanding on the long term. They won't, neglect the long term market and move here. That won't happen. Why? Because these markets are completely independent of one another. Okay. So it has a very opposite stance to what the expectation theory said. But there is one commonality as well. What is that? Here again, it explains why the yield curve is upward sloping. Okay, market segmentation theory, though it doesn't say that all the interest rates move together, it still provides us with a reason as to why the yield curve is upward sloping. Okay, it says, look here, yield curve is upward sloping because now if you're going for a long-term bond, ideally, because the tenor is long-term, see the point? Because the tenor is long-term, people would be less reluctant. Only because the tenor is long-term, not because of the short-term interest rates. Okay? Because the tenor is long-term, the demand could be lower. The people who have the appetite for a long-term bond is very few. Let's talk practical. You and I will both, if all of us, are we keen to go and invest in a 30-year bond? No, very few people would have such a need. Okay, so there itself we can see the demand or the market in that particular market, demand for long-term bond is very low. Okay, so to attract them, to induce demand and to attract people for the longer segment, the long-term market has to offer a higher interest rate. If they don't offer a higher interest rate, the demand would continue to be low. So for it to be picked up, for it to be induced, the interest rate has to be higher. Another way to look at is, yes, because it's the long-term market, tenor is long-term, very few have the appetite for such a long-term investment, therefore demand is low. When the demand is low, what happens? Can the price of that security be high? No. Price of that security, now note the point, price of that security has to be low, has to be investable, attainable. So it has to be reduced. It has to be low. When the price of an instrument is low, we learned price and interest rate have an inverse relationship. When the price is low, interest rate will be higher. Okay, so because the long-term bonds carry a low price, a higher interest rate is available. Okay, now this tells you why the yield curve is upward sloping even under the market segmentation theory. Okay, so this is a similarity we saw with expectation theory, also given justification for that. Liquidity premium theory also gave us a justification for that. Okay, so this is a commonality. But what's the difference? Unlike the other two, first two, market segmentation didn't explain or didn't believe that the interest rates move together. Okay, or that they have a strong relationship. Now you will be wondering whether this market segmentation is actually a practical one. Now think about this. Now, even the very first example I used for this theory, you and I might not have the appetite to go for a 30-year bond. Okay, a 30-year treasury bond. But let's say an insurance company who, remember the very first lecture we did, we saw they have the ability to calculate their withdrawals. Okay, so they look for long-term investments. Maybe they have, because they have that appetite, a 30-year treasury bond would be something that they'll be keen on. But you and I, as individuals who are still working, we don't want a 30-year bond. We can't lock our funds for such a long time. Okay. Let's go to a smaller requirement. There is someone else who's taking their wedding. Someone else who is married but looking for a house. Okay. So the person who's planning to take the wedding, let's say in the next 1 year, will that person invest their savings, all their savings, in long-term instruments, in 2-3 years instruments? No, because they know they have a financial need coming in the next 1 year. They will be keen on the short-term market. Okay. But other person who's married and now looking to buy a house, let's say. Okay. They know, okay, buying a house is not an easy thing. It's going to take time. Okay. And they don't have the current urgency as well. That slowly but surely finding one. Okay. So what would they do? They would invest their money probably in the medium term, something about 2 to 3 years, in a relatively high liquid instrument. In case something pops in case of opportunity comes in, they need to realize that. Okay. But they won't be putting the money in a very short instrument and keep revolving. No, they know it's not something that they're going to immediately buy, maybe in the immediate future. So their appetite would be, or their preference would be, a medium term instrument. Okay. So all of us have those preferences. Even in the practical market, we have such preferences. As an investor, maybe you are looking at only one particular tenor. Okay, something that I can quickly realize is safer for me. Someone would say, okay, I don't need the money. I don't need this many money right now. So let me invest in a 5-year bond, 5-year debenture. Okay. That's why the market segmentation theory said, even though the shorter term market is giving you a higher interest, people won't still move to the short-term market because the person is, their preferred tenor is one particular point. Okay, they look for this particular tenor. This is their investment horizon. So the additional interest rate doesn't induce them to go to another market. Okay, this is as per market segmentation theory. Finally, preferred habitat theory. Now, preferred habitat theory is very closely linked to liquidity premium and market segmentation theory. Now, what did the market segmentation theory said? Market segmentation said, okay, each market is completely segmented. There are separate persons operating in the market. In a 2-year market, there are people who want and willing to invest in a 2-year bond. That's why they are there in a 2-year bond. Someone who's looking for a 30-year bond is there in the 30-year TB market because that's what they're willing for. That is their preferred maturity. Okay. So preferred habitat theory says, okay, but there is a preference when it comes to a maturity. There is a preferred habitat, meaning there is one particular point where, investors prefer to be in. Okay. Only way investors are willing to buy a bond which is not of their preferred maturity is when they can earn a very high interest rate. Okay. Now, very first market segmentation theory said, no, interest rates of other markets are not going to entice the buyers in one particular market. Just because the interest rate in a 5-year market is higher, the 2-year market, the people who demand for a 2-year bond won't move to a 5-year bond Why? Because their need is for a 2 year, they won't move. That's what the market segmentation theory said. But preferred habitat said, okay, look here, we know there are preferred maturity. There are people who want 2-year bond, so they are there in the 2-year market. There are people who want 5-year bond, they are there in the 5-year market. But to move a person from that preferred maturity towards a longer term bond, you have to give them an additional return. Okay, that's why the short term interest rates tend to be low and the long term interest rates tend to be higher. Why? To induce someone to go to a longer bucket or longer maturity bucket, they have to give a higher interest rate, something like this. Now I said there's one person who's trying to take the wedding in 1 year. So their financial need is arising in 1 year. They would prefer for a short-term instrument, short-term investment. Okay. But let's say they come across an opportunity which says, okay, you put money for 2 years, you get 20% interest rate. But the short term is only getting you 2% or 5%. Because the interest rate is very enticing. Even a person who prefers a short term, their preferred habitat is a short term market. Still, they're willing to move out towards the long term for that higher interest rate. Okay, that's what the preferred habitat theory is suggesting. Due to this reason, long-term bonds would have a higher interest rate than the short-term bonds. So here you can see this is very much more in line with the, it's like an amalgamation between liquidity premium and the market segmentation. Okay, market segmentation is every market is different, true. But because there's additional premium given, one person in a market would be willing to go to a longer term market as well. Okay. So with that, we are done with the 4 theories explaining you the shapes behind the yield curve. I hope it was clear to you. You have time until Saturday, go through it, try to understand it. Obviously, when I do a summary, I will try to do a clear summary for you, something that's easier for you to study. Okay. So right now, from today to Saturday, maybe if you all have time, obviously you all have a Friday leave as well. Try to go through these theories, see their similarities and differences, and understand it now itself, because these questions are highly seen in your MCQs, where it could be a bit confusing. Sometimes I think I've seen it in your part 2 as well once. So very easy aspects that, if you get hold of it, something that you can easily attempt for. Try to understand risk and term structure very clearly. It's like the fundamentals in finance. Okay. So when we meet again on Saturday, I'll again start with a small brief on this, and then we'll move on to significance or the use of yield curve. Okay, we plot the yield curve to see how it's reacting. What's the relationship between interest rate and time to maturity? But what is the use of it? By plotting a graph, knowing the shape, what are we going to get from it? Okay, we are going to answer that question for you. And then we are going to go to an interesting part. Can interest rates be negative? We know interest rates are positive. But can interest rate be negative? Now here when I'm talking about interest rate, I'm not talking about the real interest rate. I'm talking about the nominal interest rate itself. The interest rate quoted by a bank to you, can it be a negative value? Okay, we are going to see that. We are going to see whether it's happening in the practical world. And then we would move to the second part, which is stock market efficiency or the informational efficiency in stock markets. Okay, so with that, we'll wind up the lesson for today. Thank you so much for joining in on your leave and listening to me. We'll meet again on Saturday, usual time. Okay, and be ready. I think from this Sunday onwards, we should be able to start our weekly questions. So, go through the first 3 lessons, be prepared. We should be able to start from this Sunday onwards. Okay, so thank you so much for listening in. Have a good day. Okay.